Did you know some UK towns are already living on borrowed time, with actual years attached, like 2050, 2055, 2070? Some have lost entire streets. Others sit below the tide that surrounds them. On the map, they still look permanent, but the reports studying them tell a different story. These are the UK towns that, on paper, won't exist in 50 years. So how does a holiday resort, built by one of Britain's most famous entertainment tycoons, end up on a list of places running out of time? When I looked into Flatcliffs, just outside Filey, the answer was more concrete than I expected. Billy Butlin opened his holiday camp here after the Second World War, specifically because the sea was so close. That closeness was the whole selling point. 80 years later, that same closeness has become the problem. 45 properties here, including Butlin's own Art Deco mansion, are now officially classified as being at imminent risk of loss from coastal erosion. This isn't speculation from campaigners or worried locals. It's the council's own language, used to justify emergency funding. And the funding itself tells the real story. Authorities have already committed nearly £500,000, not to stop the erosion, but simply to help residents leave before the ground gives way beneath them. The access road in and out is considered just as vulnerable as the houses themselves, meaning the community could become cut off before a single home actually falls. What started as a selling point has quietly become an evacuation plan. 23. That's how many cottages sit in the small hamlet of Cowbar, just across the harbour from the postcard-perfect fishing village of Staithes. And it's also the number that made local engineers change their entire approach to saving it. When I checked the reports, the reasoning turned out to be almost architectural in its precision. Rather than fight a losing battle against a crumbling clifftop road, the council has committed to physically moving that road southward, away from the edge, in 3 separate phases spread across the next 50 years. It's not a patch job, it's a slow-motion retreat, engineered on paper years in advance. The road serves as the only route to an R.N. Lee lifeboat station and a water pumping station, so losing it isn't just inconvenient, it's genuinely dangerous. Recent inspections found the erosion progressing faster than expected, pushing the first phase forward from the 2030s to as early as 2027. Picture an entire community's infrastructure being walked backward, metre by metre, on a government timetable, while the tourists below still call it one of the most picturesque villages in Yorkshire. When I started digging into Grimsby's story, I expected a tale about the sea swallowing land. What I found instead was stranger, a town swallowing its own past. In the mid-1900s, this was the largest fishing port in the entire world, a place so central to Britain's food supply that its name became shorthand for the industry itself. Then came the so-called Cod Wars, disputes with Iceland over fishing rights, followed by European quota rules that carved up the waters Grimsby's fleet once dominated. The fishing companies didn't just shrink, most of them stopped operating altogether. Today, Grimsby's population sits at a level strikingly close to what it was back in the mid-1800s, before the boom that built the town in the first place. It's as if a century and a half of growth simply reversed itself. Walk through parts of the town now, and you'll find one neighbourhood, East Marsh, ranked among the most deprived areas in the whole of England. The docks are still there, the Heritage Centre still tells the old story, but the population that once filled this place has been quietly draining away for decades. From above, Merthyr Tydfil looks like any other town tucked into the green folds of the Brecon Beacon's foothills. Terraced streets, a river valley, hills on every side. But zoom into its history and you find something almost unbelievable. In 1861, this was the largest town in Wales, bigger than Cardiff, bigger than Swansea, a genuine industrial capital built on iron and coal. Richard Trevithick built the world's first steam locomotive here in 1804. People came from across Britain and beyond to work in its ironworks, and for a while, Merthyr looked unstoppable. Then the ironworks became less competitive, the coal mines began closing after the Second World War, and the population that had once outpaced Cardiff started shrinking instead. Today, the town holds barely half the people it did at its 1911 peak of around 81,000. Entire streets that once housed steelworkers now sit quieter than they've been in over a century. The town that helped power the Industrial Revolution has spent the last 100 years slowly losing the very people it once attracted by the thousands. What actually happens to a town after the industries that built it disappear one by one? Hartlepool gives about as clear an answer as you'll find anywhere in Britain. This was once a maritime powerhouse. Shipbuilding, fishing, coal exports flowing out through its harbour, enough activity to fuel rapid growth throughout the 1800s. What's actually there today looks very different. Hartlepool now ranks among the most deprived local authorities in all of England, with nearly a third of children under 16 living in relative low-income households, well above the national average. Almost 1 in 5 working-age adults live in a household with no one in employment. The shipyards that once defined the skyline are gone, and so is much of the economic identity they provided. Why does this matter beyond Hartlepool itself? Because it's become something of a national reference point, a town researchers and policymakers point to again and again when discussing what happens when an entire local economy is built around a single industry, and that industry simply stops needing the people who built it. 9,000, that's the number of properties in Great Yarmouth currently identified as being exposed to coastal erosion, and when I checked what the council itself expects for the future, the number gets worse, not better. Their own reporting states plainly that this figure will be significantly higher by 2050 if the current shoreline plan isn't fully carried out. This isn't a fringe estimate from an environmental campaign group. It's the Borough Council's own motion, presented directly to its members, urging the government to treat the situation as urgent. Compare that to a typical English seaside town, where erosion risk might affect a few dozen homes at most, and the scale here becomes almost hard to process. During the 2013 storm surge, authorities had already made the call to evacuate parts of the town before the worst of the flooding even arrived, a decision made not out of certainty, but because waiting for confirmation would have cost too much time. Great Yarmouth isn't quietly eroding in the background. It's a town whose local government is actively lobbying for national emergency funding, right now, based on numbers that are only projected to climb. When I checked the flood risk data for Boston, I genuinely thought I'd misread it. More than 90% of homes in this Lincolnshire market town have been identified as being in danger of flooding, the highest percentage of any town in England, ahead of every other coastal community on this list. The reason comes down to basic geography. The land around Boston is flat, low-lying, and sits almost entirely below sea level, protected only by the tidal Haven River and a network of drainage channels working constantly against gravity. In December 2013, a tidal surge pushed water levels on the River Haven more than 6 meters above sea level, higher than the catastrophic floods of 1953, breaching defenses and flooding the town's main church along with 200 properties. A barrier gate has since been installed, one that can be raised in just 20 minutes to hold back the tide when the warnings come in. But here's the strange part. Even with that barrier now protecting thousands of homes, official assessments still count the vast majority of Boston as flood-exposed. This is a town where 9 in 10 houses officially exist inside the danger zone, defenses or not. The more I dug into King's Lynn, the less it felt like a town with a flooding problem, and the more it felt like a town built on ground that no longer really works. Here's the number that changed how I saw it. A 2026 Environment Agency baseline report puts roughly 87% of the entire Fens system, the low-lying region draining into the Wash, below mean spring tide level. King's Lynn sits right where the River Great Ouse empties into that same tidal basin. One widely cited flood risk model, built by the US-based Climate Central Research Group, projects that most of the town could sit below the annual flood level by 2050. This isn't a town waiting for a storm to arrive someday. It's a town whose baseline elevation is already the story. Areas like West Lynn and North Lynn, currently rated as low flood risk, are modelled to see substantially more of their land reclassified into the highest flood category within a normal human lifetime. Engineers here have even floated the idea of a tidal barrage across the Great Ouse as a long-term option, the kind of infrastructure usually reserved for cities, not for a historic port town of this size. £11 million. That's the size of the coastal defence scheme now underway on Aberystwyth's historic seafront, and the reason for it traces back to a single night in January 2014. A storm tore into the town's Victorian promenade with such force that it left the seawall described by locals as old, tired and brittle, flooding 20 properties and forcing evacuations along Marine Terrace. To understand the scale of that damage, picture this. Engineers assessing the aftermath said the wall itself needed a complete structural rethink, not just patching, because Victorian-era defences simply weren't built for what the sea is now throwing at them. And the number that really puts this in perspective is the one buried in the council's own consultation documents. Without further intervention, they project 460 properties along this stretch will be at risk of flooding within the next 100 years. That's nearly 500,000 homes, in a university town famous for its pier and its sweeping sea views, sitting on a countdown that started the moment engineers ran the numbers on rising sea levels, and a promenade built for a very different century. From the seafront, Cromer looks reassuringly permanent. A Victorian pier, crab boats pulled up on the beach, sea walls that have clearly been fought for and maintained. And that's not an illusion. Cromer is officially classified under a hold-the-line policy, meaning its defences are actively protected for the foreseeable future. But look just a few miles either direction along the same stretch of coast, and the story changes entirely. The council's own Coastwise project, the same one protecting Cromer, projects that more than 1,000 homes will be lost to erosion across the wider North Norfolk coastline within the next 100 years. At Sidestrand, barely down the road, cliffs made of soft glacial clay have already collapsed after heavy rain, crumbling on camera in council footage. This is where it gets genuinely strange. Cromer's safety isn't really about geology being kinder here. It's a funding and policy decision, actively renewed through schemes completed just last year. The town stands protected right in the middle of one of the most rapidly retreating coastlines in Europe. An island of intervention, surrounded on both sides by land the authorities have already agreed to let go. How does an island end up sitting below the very water that surrounds it? On Canvey Island, that's not a rhetorical question. It's simply how the place was built. Ground levels here often sit nearly 2 meters below the daily high tide mark in the Thames estuary, meaning more than 15,000 residential properties exist only because 23 kilometers of tidal defences hold the sea back, every single day, without exception. What's actually keeping the island dry is a barrier system dating partly back to the 1930s, now undergoing a £75 million renewal designed to extend its working life only as far as 2070. That number matters more than it might seem. It's not a symbolic target, it's an engineering deadline, the point at which current infrastructure is expected to need replacing again. In 1953, when those original defences failed, 59 people died, and 13,000 residents had to be evacuated in a single night. Street names like Dyke Crescent and Deepwater Road still quietly commemorate that history. Canvey isn't waiting for a future flood risk to arrive. It's a community whose present tense already depends entirely on holding the sea exactly where engineers have told it to stay. 757. That's the number of properties officially projected to be at risk of flooding in Barmouth once its current sea defences reach the end of what engineers call their useful life. To understand why that number exists at all, it helps to look at the actual policy behind it. Wales's shoreline management plan currently commits to holding the line here, keeping the seawall maintained and reinforced. But the same government document also states, in plain terms, that this approach is expected to become increasingly difficult to sustain at North Barmouth, with managed retreat likely needed before 2055. That's not a distant hypothetical century away, it's roughly 1 generation from now, already written into official coastal strategy. In 2020, storms badly damaged the promenade, leaving what engineers described as unsafe voiding beneath the walkway itself, caused by sand quietly draining out from underneath. So while the council fights to extend the wall's life toward 2075, the underlying math hasn't changed. 757 homes, one aging structure standing between them and the sea, and a government-set expiry date already on record. The more I looked into Lyme Regis, the less this felt like a story about slow erosion, and the more it felt like a story about ground that can simply give way all at once. In May 2008, roughly 400 meters of cliff between Lyme Regis and the neighboring village of Sharmouth slipped in a single event, described by geologists at the time as the worst landslip in Dorset in 100 years. To put that in perspective, 400 meters is longer than 4 football pitches laid end to end, all of it moving in one motion, exposing an old landfill site that had been buried beneath the hillside for decades. The geology here explains why. Limestone sits beneath a layer of clay, and as that clay erodes, everything above it becomes unstable, prone to slipping, rather than simply wearing away. This is fully documented, engineered around, and still genuinely alarming. A £20 million coastal scheme, 30 years in the planning, was eventually built specifically to protect 480 homes and the town's main access road from meeting the same fate. Lyme Regis isn't losing its coastline gradually. It's a town that has already watched, within living memory, entire sections of itself disappear in a matter of hours. So why does the top spot on this list go to a town that's officially considered safe? When I checked Sheringham's own classification, it's protected under a hold-the-line policy, just like Cromer further along the coast. Defences maintained, funding secured, no managed retreat currently planned. And yet look at where it actually sits, right in the middle of a 21-mile stretch of North Norfolk cliffline, now recognised as one of the fastest eroding coastlines anywhere in Europe. This is where it gets genuinely strange. In early 2024, Sheringham was one of only 5 villages chosen to host official coastwise community sessions. The same emergency adaptation programme built specifically for places expected to lose land within the century. A defended town sitting inside a programme designed for towns that aren't defended. That contradiction is the whole point of ranking it first. Every village lower on this list has a visible crack, a cliff already falling, a road already being moved. Sheringham has none of that, just a policy decision, renewed year by year, standing between a protected seafront and the same retreating coastline that's already swallowing its neighbours on either side.